Steve Rogers has quit. Disillusioned with those whom he served and feeling his entire career had been a lie, he has turned his back on the role of the Sentinel of Liberty. So, what now for Steve? And who will take up the mantle of Captain America? Oh, by the way, if you like annoying characters, you're going to love this one. Last time out, we saw triumph with the defeat of Moonstone and the Secret Empire, and defeat, as Steve Rogers discovered that he was serving a government that did not exercise the ideals that he was fighting to preserve. If you didn't see part 1, feel free to check it out via this link. So Steve did the unthinkable. He walked away from being the Star-Spangled Avenger. And not for the first time. You look far too young to remember it, but Steve Rogers had hung up his shield once before. It happened back in 1967 in issue 95 of Tales of Suspense. These were the days when a number of Marvel's titles were split books, with half of the book being dedicated to one character and the other half to another. For example, later issues of Tales to Astonish were shared between the Submariner and the Hulk. And this was shared between Cap and... how did you know? This book came out during the golden age of Marvel, meaning that its creative team are legends. Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby. And if you don't know who they are, then why on earth are you watching this video? After the issue starts with Cap busting the hideout of gang leader Gunnar Gates, we get a lot of romance. Why? Well, because Steve isn't giving up his life as Captain America due to any kind of disillusionment with the establishment. Oh no, he's giving it up for the love of a good woman, Agent 13 specifically, who he would eventually discover was none other than Sharon Carter, the younger sister of Steve's wartime sweetheart, Peggy. He realises that duty is always going to stop him from committing to her, and so he resolves to retire after this, his last job. So, after dropping Agent 13 off after a date and tracking down Gunnar Gates, he pulls off his mask one last time. It is time for Steve Rogers to live his own life. As you can imagine, this causes quite a stir among the general population and the ranks of intelligence services. What Steve doesn't realise is that Sharon shares his sense of duty and has no intention of quitting S.H.I.E.L.D. just yet. Okay, never mind. Steve still feels pretty content with his decision, until he sits alone and is haunted by voices and visions from his past. Issue 96 finds, well, I suppose that is Captain America, but it certainly ain't Steve Rogers. That's because from the very first page, we see that various people have taken it upon themselves to fill the role of the Sentinel of Liberty. None of them successfully. Worse than that, we see that members of the underworld are trying to off whoever looks like Cap in the hope that they are the real deal. One of these people has apparently only just picked up his outfit from a fancy dress store. Actually, he's got some moves, but not enough to avoid getting hit in the arm by a gunman's shot. It is as he falls and is saved by someone displaying abilities that only the real Captain America can have, that the issue's main villain, known only as the Sniper, tries and fails to kill the main man himself. Maybe he could have finished the job if a life model decoy and S.H.I.E.L.D.'s best agents hadn't scuppered him. After Steve deals with the heavies who are hoping to deal with him, Nick Fury points out that people like him can't put themselves out to pasture because, like it or not, he is Captain America. That is enough to talk Steve back out of retirement, and the status quo is resumed. Tales of Suspense only lasted 3 more issues before Iron Man left for a solo career, and the series was rebranded as Captain America with issue 100. No relaunch with a new #1 back then. Returning to 1974, we find that the series had no Captain America. Writer Steve Englehart had set out to ask and answer the question, who is Captain America? He had begun to answer that. For a start, he was a man of such principle that it wasn't enough for just him to be doing the right thing. He had to be serving people who also did the right thing. Rhetoric wasn't enough. A genuine adherence to the ideals they espoused was necessary, kind of providing the moral foundations for him to build on. But now he discovered that he'd been building on weak foundations, and his world came crashing down. Of course, Sam Wilson was still in spandex, but would he continue the fight alone? Or could a new figure fill the Captain America costume? As before, Sal Buscema is putting the images to Steve Englehart's words. If only it was like the good old days, huh? With Cap fighting alongside the Falcon. Well, maybe it is. Because look, here they are, teaming up once more against a troop of strangely garbed henchmen outside some kind of European-style castle. Both of them are ploughing effortlessly through the horde of henchmen in an effort to get to the castle wherein lies a dangerous bomb. And look, it doesn't take long before we see one of Sal Buscema's stylistic trademarks. Not just the mouth, but he does love sending people flying upside down. They soon find themselves within the castle and they've found the bomb, called the Brain Blaster. Don't know why. They need to get it out of the window before it goes off, but it seems they've run out of time. A dream. Yes, it is a dream. Cap hasn't returned to action. This gives Sam Wilson a chance to reflect on events. He remembers how Steve said that it took courage for him to walk away from his role as Captain America. But Sam sees it differently, considers his friend to have just dropped out, to have quit. He thinks he could still talk Steve round, so he visits his office, where Steve is currently crashing. He offers his partner the chance to go out on patrol, just like they always do. But Steve is adamant. There will be no patrol. He is no longer Captain America. Sam isn't happy with this. He doesn't want to hear Steve's justification, and he goes out on patrol on his own. And Steve wonders, is this the cost of following his conscience? Will his decision mean they will lose his friends, everything except his self-respect? The Secret Empire and Moonstone are, of course, defeated. That means we need a new villain. We get him in the form of Lucifer, an intriguing individual currently living out an exile in another dimension. But with some newly retrieved Cassadrax mineral, he is able to power his dimensional transmitter, and that sends him back to Earth. Once there, his plans for revenge and world domination are briefly put on hold as he sees a convenience store. He realises it's been a long time since he has tasted any of Earth's delicacies, and he knows that there'll be some in that store. Once inside, hold on, is this issue's Twinkie advert? No, this is his choice of foodstuffs. Whilst Lucifer is inside the store, 3 would-be burglars are outside, and as they break in, they set off the security alarm. This brings the cops running, which is something that is bad news for both them and Lucifer, and the 4 of them form a very unusual alliance. As more cops arrive, they are met by the gang using their fists and Lucifer using his powers. But the scales of justice are tipped towards the side of good when the Falcon arrives, with Redwing, of course. Lucifer asks, can the Falcon even hope to match his ionic energy? And the Falcon, just like us, knows the answer to that one. In fact, Lucifer is so confident, he turns his back on Falcon. Now that's not going to help Sam's insecurities. But then something strange happens. Lucifer literally begins to fade from existence. He senses that it's down to the food that he ate, the chemicals in it entering his bloodstream. So it was a Twinkie. To continue to exist on Earth, Lucifer has to merge with another person, and he chooses one of the burglars to do so. Returned to full power, he gets the Falcon to back off before leaving the scene with the promise that they will hear from him once more. Meanwhile, the news of Captain America quitting has broken, and as you would expect, it makes the front page of the Daily Bugle. Steve Rogers has heard the reaction. Some people are sad, some shocked, but some hate him. Hate him for taking away the consistent comfort that a figure like Captain America brought to people. Whilst he deals with that, Lucifer's problems still haven't finished. Yes, he got himself a new body, but it seems that that human body is not strong enough to contain his vast powers. He needs to find a second body so that he can share his powers between those 2 people. He finds the ideal person locked up in the nearby New York detention centre. It's Ares from the Zodiac. He is happy to be free, even if it does mean carrying half of somebody else's consciousness. So now, of course, we have two Lucifers. Of course. And the Falcon is the first person to discover this. This splitting of his powers has solved Lucifer's main problem. However, with only half his power, he is unable to summon up his ionic energy. This will make things slightly easier for the Falcon, although still 2 half Lucifers is more than a match for our feathered hero. But now the cops are on their way. A car pulls up beside the 2 Lucifers, but far from turn them in, the driver offers them an escape, one which they gladly take up. Steve Rogers has been out for a walk trying to clear his head when he stumbles upon his former partner. He runs to the Falcon's aid, but it's too little, too late. Falcon says, back off. If he'd been there when he was needed, the pair of them could have defeated the 2 Lucifers. And what of the 2 Lucifers? Where is it taking them? Who sent it? Well, it turns out it was sent by none other than mob boss Morgan, a man who despises the Falcon and wants him dead. Well, despite the bad vibes in the air, that was an enjoyable Falcon-centric issue. Something maybe that we need to get used to. Let's see if issue 178 continues in that vein. Well, it certainly doesn't hang around in bringing us some more action. We get one panel to catch our breath before the fists start flying once more. So despite the fact that the Falcon has been searching for the 2 Lucifers, they have also been searching for him. And we know that Morgan is the man behind that. But for one guy who, aside from the ability to fly, doesn't have any powers, Falcon does remarkably well against them in a great action-packed battle. Action-packed until one of them is launched into a telegraph pole. Maybe the Falcon does have super strength after all. And the electrical wires are sent down onto the roof where they are battling. This keeps the 3 combatants separated. The Falcon can't possibly get to them. Although he could easily fly over them. But no. Instead, the 2 Lucifers leave the scene with the promise that this is not the end. And now things start to get really interesting as we begin to explore the question of who will be the next Captain America. Well, it won't be Steve Rogers, but he does still need to stay in shape. And we catch up with him at the gym, where Rosco, a friendly young lad who works at the gym, says he ain't never seen anybody... right, I get it. The Bronx. I ain't never seen anybody work out like that before. And Rosco, like many people, is intrigued about the news of Captain America quitting. And he's not the only one. But some people decide to do more than just talk about Captain America. This is Bob Russo, the highest paid third baseman in history. But Bob has made a big decision. He's going to turn his back on professional baseball to become the new Captain America. I'm not sure if playing baseball qualifies you, but okay. Meanwhile, Morgan isn't happy. He digs out the 2 Lucifers, saying they're supposed to be superhuman, but they can't even kill one normal man. One of the Lucifers points out that there was also a bird. You're not doing yourself any favours here, Lucifer. During this meeting, one of the Lucifers gets a splitting headache. He really isn't very impressive, is he? Whilst the other explains to Morgan that when he was on Earth before, he had a laboratory in the southwest. If he can get to the laboratory, there is something there that can help him kill the Falcon. Morgan says fine. He doesn't care how it's done. He just wants the Falcon dead. In that laboratory, we discover that Lucifer had a selection of robots. Whilst he is busy reactivating those, we see that we have a new Captain America. What? Just like that? Yes, just like that. Because here he is, Bob Russo, the new Captain America. Where did he get the costume from? But his is a very short crime-fighting career, because as he swings down to foil a bank robbery, it seems he has misjudged the swing. He slams into a brick wall, breaking his arm. I was going to ask where he got the shield from, but seeing as we don't actually see the front of it, and it appears to have bent quite easily, I don't know, maybe he made it himself from tin foil. Lucifer's robots have been reactivated, and they are now on a rampage in the middle of Harlem. The two Lucifers watch on gleefully, although one still does have a bit of a headache. The Falcon soon arrives, taking on the robots, but he is under no illusions. He knows this is a trap, and he knows that the Lucifers are behind it. Steve Rogers is out on another one of his walks, and yet again he stumbles across the Falcon in battle. Last time he was fighting 2 Lucifers, this time he's fighting 3 robots, with the Lucifers waiting in the wings. Steve battles with his conscience. He has quit, there's no going back, but Sam is his friend and he needs his help. So how can he help without donning the old red, white and blue? The solution is a simple one. He buys himself a ski mask, and as the 2 Lucifers stand over their stricken foe, he evens up the odds. And we get a great line from Steve Englehart as he says, "That is when the freight train hits." Steve is still battling with himself, thinking, is that all it took to get him back in action? But his thoughts are interrupted by the robots. With one rocketing towards him and the other 2 behind him, it takes nothing more than a simple bullfighter's trick to take all 3 out in one move. But with those 3 down, we still have the 2 Lucifers to worry about. Is it habit or instinct that makes Steve pick up the lid of a nearby trash can? That results in a humiliating blow for one of the Lucifers, and the other, despite getting the drop on Steve, is hampered by another one of those darned headaches. But this headache, a result of Lucifer's power, even at half strength, pumping around a human body, proves to be fatal, and one of the 2 hosts collapses. The other Lucifer thinks good riddance, but it is quickly pointed out that those 2 are one. If one dies, the other dies. And indeed he does. The 2 mortal hosts are dead, and Lucifer's spirit returns to that other dimension. Steve rushes to check that the Falcon is okay. He is, and he thanks Steve for saving his life. But he says from now on, he wants Steve to leave him alone. The Falcon really isn't taking this split well, is he? 2 issues ago, it seemed that the ghost of Captain America was haunting the Falcon on the cover of issue 177. Now it seems that same ghost is haunting Steve Rogers. Much like Peter Parker when he occasionally hangs up the old red and blues, Steve Rogers, liberated from the burden of being Captain America, feels truly free, happy, content. He can actually enjoy some time with his girlfriend, Sharon Carter. He still has personal issues, of course. For example, he wants to tell Peggy Carter that it is her younger sister that he's now in love with. But much like Peter Parker, it seems that fate will not allow him to enjoy his new life. An arrow suddenly destroys his shopping bag. Another one lets off smoke nearby him and his girlfriend. Steve tells Sharon to watch her eyes. "Watch your eyes, mate. They're all over the place." Before another 2 pin him to the wall, albeit not for long. And who is it that's launching these arrows in Steve's direction? It is a character that we've not seen before. And he is called the Golden Archer. What do you mean, cheesy? He says that Steve Rogers may not know him, but he knows Steve Rogers. And there is a great debt that needs to be settled between the 2 of them. Not just yet, though. He will return 3 more times, and on that 4th visit, Steve Rogers will die. We leave a shirtless Steve Rogers pondering how this Joker knows who he is, and we travel across to another part of the city, to Harlem, and the office of local crime boss Morgan. Just like Steve, he is about to get a surprise visitor, and just like Steve, his visitor is very unwelcome. It's the Falcon. He tells Morgan he knows it was him that sent the 2 Lucifers after him. Morgan says, "How? How do you know?" "Yeah, how does he know?" Falcon says, "Never mind how." "Oh, okay." I suppose he could have overheard them talking about it on page 26 of the previous issue, although he certainly seemed to be unconscious at the time. He tells Morgan that if he wants to stop him, he's got to do better than just sending those 2 Lucifers after him, because he isn't going to stop until he's put Morgan away. Steve Rogers is back in the gym, with Rosco of course, but their session is interrupted by a sonic arrow, launched through the window by, yes, it's him again. Window, Steve? Mind you, I guess the Golden Archer's already broken it, hasn't he? And again, Rosco comments on how he has never seen anybody move like Steve before. He asks, "Did you hurt yourself? Are you okay?" He's beginning to annoy me. In a completely different part of the country, San Rafael, California to be precise, we meet up with a man called Scar, who is reading about how baseball star Bob Russo failed to fill the Captain America void. That gives him an idea. Why can't he be the new Captain America? Not entirely sure you're appropriate for the job. Although when another member of the motorcycle gang says that he wants first dibs on being a superhero, how old are they? 10? Scar certainly shows that he's got the fighting chops for the job. I suppose Steve Englehart is trying to say that when someone as high profile as Captain America steps away from the spotlight, someone will try to fill that void, even if they aren't necessarily the right kind of person for the job. Someone who definitely is the right man for the job is at that moment in time carrying out a very unsavoury task. Taking an unexpected opportunity, half hidden in shadow, Steve tells Peggy Carter that once they had a beautiful relationship, but that relationship can continue no more, not in the present day. She runs off distressed and he thinks he must go after her. However, he is stopped by a golden arrow. Instinctively, Steve pursues his assailant, using all of his strength and skill. And when the Golden Archer fires an arrow directly at him, once more, as he did against the Lucifers, instinctively Steve uses another trash can lid as a shield. And this time, this isn't lost on him. And it's a familiar pose that he strikes as he chases after his attacker. But ultimately, a blinding flash from another of the Archer's arrows means that he is able to get away. At least Steve knows that he will have one more chance to get the guy. And now it's time for the debut of another new Captain America. And this one, like the Cap that we're used to, rides a motorcycle. Yes, that's right. This is Scar making his debut. He's certainly got the kahunas for it as he runs to foil a mugging. However, it turns out the 2 muggers have got another 4 friends, and this proves to be too much for our new Star-Spangled Avenger. He says 2 of them he could have handled, maybe even 3, but not 6. And another superhero career, along with a cheap shield, comes to an abrupt end. As for Steve, it's time for that final run-in with the Golden Archer. His medieval-themed enemy thinks he has got the drop on Steve, seeing his silhouette at his window. But it's a setup, and Steve happily takes the man down. We get a brief hand-to-hand battle where we see that the Archer is no slouch, even resorting to throwing his arrows. But it's after Steve has downed the villain that he realises he recognises the man's voice. It turns out he has met the Golden Archer before, after all, because it is none other than Hawkeye. That can't be an easy mask to hide underneath another mask. You see, when the Golden Archer said that there was a debt to be settled between the 2, he meant it. But it was a debt that Hawkeye owed Steve. Because when Hawkeye first joined the Avengers, Steve showed him how to be a real, true hero. And now he wants to do the same for Steve. But when Steve insists he definitely isn't coming back as Captain America, Hawkeye says he believes him. He knows how stubborn he can be. However, he is wasting his power, his gifts, all because of what was going on in Washington. That shouldn't be the case. But he doesn't have to be Captain America. He could be somebody new. And Steve loves the idea. And so we reach an historic moment in the life of Steve Rogers. Yes, he had quit being Captain America before, but he'd never taken up a new alter ego. But with issue 180, he did. His new superhero persona made perfect sense in relation to the storyline. Cap symbolised the country he loved, even wearing the flag. With his faith in the USA destroyed, he was essentially a man without a country. And as such, Steve Englehart's girlfriend at the time suggested the name Nomad. It made perfect sense, and I like it. I like the name and I like the costume. You want to see him in action, don't you? Not me. Fair enough. Carry on. So here we go, the beginning of a brand new era for Steve Rogers. And this is different, because Steve Englehart's girlfriend gets a credit. Anyway, the other Steve, Rogers, is feeling very positive about his future and is lost in his thoughts. So lost, in fact, that he nearly gets himself run over. When he responds to the irate taxi driver in the most exuberant fashion, the taxi driver says, "Hey, are you out of your bird?" I beg your pardon? You remember the Viper, the supervillain who started the whole Moonstone thing as a way of getting revenge against Captain America? Well, he is now on his way to a grand jury in the company of a couple of US Marshals. As they make their way along a secluded road heading for DC, a bomb is thrown out in front of their car, and they narrowly avoid it as it explodes. Bomb? That's a novel approach to sound effects. Gun, gun, ricochet, watch out, explosion. That was no random bomb. As the US Marshals exit the vehicle, they are all executed. The Viper assumes that the Serpent Squad are behind this, there to spring him free. But actually, it's Madam Hydra. She explains that she is no longer interested in serving Hydra. Instead, she wants to work towards serpent supremacy, for the triumph of terror over the forces of civilization. And to do that, she's going to change her name to Viper. And the original Viper's response to this is actually quite funny. He says, "Won't that cause confusion in the marketplace? What with there being two Vipers?" But she points out that she knows that he can tell what she's angling at. There will be only one Viper, and it won't be him. She says he will now never get the chance to betray the Serpent Squad, as she strips his body of his costume. Elsewhere, the new Viper's companion, Princess Python, is breaking free another couple of serpent-themed villains, the Cobra and the Eel. The Eel? Despite that zoological misstep, the three of them escape, and it seems the Serpent Squad lives again. As we know, Steve Rogers is happy with his career change, ecstatic even. Sharon Carter isn't. She says she could accept him being Captain America because he was already so well established in that role. But when he quit, a whole new life suddenly lay before her. She feels that that life now has been snatched away. After the new Viper convenes the first meeting of the new and improved Serpent Squad, where she explains to them a bit of her background and shows off her new costume, which I don't think is anywhere near as good as the old one, we see that Steve is trying to solve the problem of his own new costume. He says he never realised how much effort he was saved by the government designing his old costume, and indeed he does put effort into it. He works through 3 pads of paper. Then, once he's finalised the design, he cuts up the material, stitches it together. What a man of many talents he is. He comments that the name should be something dark and mysterious, and he says he hopes a bat doesn't fly through his window to give him inspiration. Otherwise, he'll be in big trouble. His skills do have a limit though, because he says he's got to go and pick up his boots and gloves, and his ponderings on his name continue. He says that since the Secret Empire business, he has made himself a man without a country. That gives him the final bit of inspiration he needs, and he unveils himself as the Nomad. And I'd love to know what shops sell gloves like those. But all in all, it's a pretty good outfit. Oh, Rosco. He is visiting Sam Wilson's office, having seen in the gym registry that that is where Steve Rogers is currently laying his head. Whilst there, naturally he bumps into the Falcon. We know that's a natural thing to happen. Of course, he doesn't. He says, "I was just thinking about Captain America and I pops his partner." But the Falcon points out that he's got nothing to do with Captain America anymore. And Rosco says, "That's just the point." Well, he actually says, "That's just the point." He says they all know there have been a few guys trying to fill Cap's boots. Well, he's going to do it. and he wanted Steve to be his trainer. Could you imagine Rosco being the new Captain America? Mind you, he wouldn't be much worse than those other clowns, would he? Oh no. No, please, no. Well, the Falcon's no idiot and he sends him packing. But Rosco doesn't take it well, telling him to go suck a peach. But I fear we haven't seen the last of him. At the other end of the spectrum, Nomad gets a great introduction to the city. Night. And the steaming air over Washington, D.C. turns the air to rippling, limpid gold. Suddenly, against the gold, there comes a compact mass of shadows, a thrilling figure of the night. The Nomad is on the prowl. Indeed he is, and he's in luck, because our favourite selection of snakes are in the process of kidnapping someone from the cinema. Not if Nomad has anything to do with it. Of course, they think they're dealing with the newest hero on the block, someone who's naive and inexperienced. They will soon learn how wrong they are. The Serpent Squad are in no mood to give up their prize though, and they run back inside the theatre, where the Viper knocks aside one of the ushers, telling him to inform the police that she could have killed him, but the Serpent Squad treat the people well. That's a rather odd thing for a former Hydra member to say, isn't it? Rather leftist, wouldn't you agree? Well, it was, and it was supposed to be, because writer Steve Englehart intended for the Viper and the Serpent Squad's ideology to reflect that of a real-life group called the Symbionese Liberation Army. They were active around this time in the United States, and they are considered to be the first terrorist group to emerge from the left. I'll tell you something else as well. They had a flag. Would you like to see it? Look at that. It's got a Hydra on it. How weird is that? That's got to be, what, art imitating life, imitating art? Anyway, as I was saying, the Serpent Squad soon learn that they aren't dealing with some novice. Indeed, Nomad finds no difficulty in dealing with them at all. Before you know it, all 4 members have been downed in one way or another. In fact, he only trips up when he literally trips on that cloak of his, giving the villains an opportunity to escape with their victim. This illustrates to Steve why he never had a cloak before, and he soon rectifies his mistake. He now needs to hunt down the Serpent Squad and free that hostage. They are embarking on the second part of their plan, where, already feeling quite pleased with themselves, the Viper unveils a 5th member of their group, the Atlantean warlord Krang, with the serpent crown, of course. I've never really been into the Atlanteans. They just look a bit too 1950s Flash Gordon for me. Anyway, time for us to move on, and time to meet the latest new Captain America. And judging by the cover, things aren't about to improve for the Serpent Squad. Actually, that cover is pretty misleading, as you will see. The Atlantis connections continue not just with Krang and the Serpent Squad, but as Steve Rogers is busy admiring the Lincoln Memorial, he comes face to face with a sometimes ally, sometimes adversary, the Submariner. He is looking for Krang, and because Steve has recently tumbled with the Serpent Squad, and they are working with Krang, Namor, by some weird logic, assumes that Nomad must therefore know where Krang is. But Nomad doesn't even know the name. This, of course, provides an excuse for them to fight. Namor is actually impressed with how well this newcomer performs, but still the Prince of Atlantis does have the upper hand. And who knows how it would have ended if Steve hadn't dropped in a reference to their battle during the Avengers Defenders War. That is enough to stop Namor in his tracks, and he becomes the first person to learn Nomad's secret identity. Namor and Nomad then sit and shoot the breeze for a while until they hear the radio of a passing car. It's from Krang himself, announcing to the world that he and the Serpent Squad were behind that kidnapping, and the man they kidnapped is none other than the president of Roxxon Oil. Then the president's voice is heard, albeit via the control of the Serpent Crown. He assures those listening that as long as no one interferes in the plans of the Serpent Squad, he won't be harmed. Also, within 24 hours, further demands will be made. What are our heroes to do? Well, first off, Steve puts in a call to S.H.I.E.L.D., where Nick Fury, after checking his files, can confirm that Roxxon do indeed have an oil rig near the site of Lemuria, the land from where the Serpent Crown originates. That's enough for our heroes, and they set off for that destination. What's the Falcon up to? I'm almost afraid to look. Actually, he's trying out his mental link with Redwing after Professor X suggested he may have mutant abilities. That idea was toyed with for a while before eventually being dropped. But successful as it may be, today's session is interrupted by... oh no. Did what, Boyd man? Initially, Falcon does think this is Cap, but then he realises that Cap could never be this irritating. Of course, it's Rosco. Apparently, he's Danu CA. Falcon says wearing that uniform is no game. I agree. So where did he get it from? A fancy dress shop? Is that shield plastic? Falcon then gives him a demonstration of the kind of moves that Captain America can make. And actually, Rosco emulates them pretty well, though not perfectly. It's only when Peggy Carter turns up, recognising the uniform but realising the person within it isn't Steve Rogers, that Rosco leaves the scene. In typical Captain America fashion, I may add. Then we've got 2 letters pages to get through. Nothing of interest here really. Plenty of praise for the Secret Empire storyline, including this letter from someone called Mark Grunwald. I mean, what would he know about Steve Rogers giving up being Captain America anyway? Oh, right. And then we see the Serpent Squad landing on that oil rig by sunken Lemuria. They aren't there to draw for oil. Instead, they're going to use the rig to somehow raise Lemuria to the surface. That will be the launch pad for their attempt at global conquest. Plus, of course, they have the mind-controlled president of Roxxon Oil with them. It's his oil rig. He'll do with it whatever he wants. However, there is a blue and gold spanner in the works, because Nomad is there, intentionally fighting alone because he told the Submariner to wait in the car for him so that he, in his new guise, could prove himself. And he certainly begins the battle in a memorable way, using Princess Python's snake like a baseball bat. The Cobra is quickly on him though, and quickly off again. And as each member of the Serpent Squad takes a battering, it quickly becomes clear that there is only going to be one victor in this contest, despite the numerical disadvantage. So Krang throws the Serpent Crown to Viper for safekeeping, and she and the Cobra are the only villains to escape the scene. Krang even takes another one on the chin for good measure. Of course, without the Serpent Crown, Roxxon's president is no longer under its control. And things only get better for him, as his own personal strike force arrive at the oil rig to keep him safe. Nomad, it seems, isn't required. Steve is understandably insulted by this, and happily fires off one last punch. I'm not sure that was necessary. Nomad may not be required there, but he also isn't going to give up on finding those last couple of members of the Serpent Squad. Remember that I said that the cover was misleading? Well, now you know why. The Falcon didn't even fight the Serpent Squad, let alone Rosco. So where have the Viper and Cobra gone? For the answer to that question, we have to go to the only other title to feature Steve Rogers in his Nomad guise, and that is Avengers issue 131. The price of this one on the second-hand market is pushed up by the fact that it features the debut of the Legion of the Unliving. Not that I care about them. Funnily enough, the creative team are the same as on Cap's book. Steve Englehart writing, Sal Buscema on pencils. The Avengers are in it. The Legion of the Unliving are in it. Nomad is in it. Who else? The Avengers are in South Vietnam, birthplace of Mantis. And it's a funny old issue, this one, because as the title suggests, the events that unfold all take place within half an hour. And indeed, for the Avengers, it is a quiet half hour. Once Mantis has finished kicking this guy in the face, that is. But little do they realise that, courtesy of Kang the Conqueror and Immortus, there is a lot going on that they are unaware of. So, no battles with supervillains in this issue, but the team does have a visitor. It is, of course, Nomad, who, having finished with the Serpent Squad in the Pacific Ocean, thought he would stop by and see his old colleagues on his way home. His friends are all happy to see him, and of course Hawkeye gets to see, for the first time, the results of his efforts a couple of issues ago. Oh yeah, and this is the period when Iron Man had a nose. Nomad says that once he has tracked down the last 2 members of the Serpent Squad and dealt with them, he will be available once more for active duty as an Avenger. Although Steve did rejoin the Avengers, it wouldn't be for another 10 issues, by which time the Nomad is no more. The rest of this issue is filled with all sorts of shenanigans, courtesy of Kang, Immortus, and the Legion of the Unliving. You can't see me, but you know I'm shrugging. At which point the Avengers receive a call from Jarvis. He lets them all know that the remaining members of the Serpent Squad have been sighted in Los Angeles. That proves to be Nomad's cue to leave, and he wishes them all an au revoir. If we want to follow Nomad back to LA, then we have to follow him back to the title from which he came. This time it's issue 182, and there is a significant change in this issue. Our pal Sal Buscema is no longer on the title. He would pop back for a bit of a cameo in a few issues' time, but otherwise we now have the new regular artist, Frank Robbins. He had only worked on a couple of other comics before this, but would stay on the title for just short of a year. Then he would move on to other works such as The Invaders and The Man from Atlantis. This is a bit odd. It feels like we've missed an issue. The last time we saw the surviving members of the Serpent Squad, they were fleeing that oil rig in the Pacific. Now they're holed up in LA in a shootout with armed officers. Initially, I read this issue before the Avengers. When I eventually got my hands on that issue of the Avengers, I was expecting a bit more of the Serpent Squad in it, rather than them just being mentioned on the walkie-talkie. Steve wants to try to bring the siege to a swift end, but the cops, thinking he is some new kid on the block, grab him, and when they see that he is insistent that he gets involved, they knock him out for his own safety. He then gets cuffed to the wheel of a patrol car, whilst the officers do their duty and charge the Serpent Squad's hideout, guns blazing. But they are no match for the bloodthirsty villains, and Steve watches on helplessly as they get mown down. This is actually a pretty good, fraught situation. Steve incapacitated as the officers lose their lives, but he isn't incapacitated for long, because he soon tears the wheel off of the patrol car, his super strength presumably coming into play there. That means, of course, that the cuffs are no hindrance, and he then uses a telegraph pole to launch himself into the Serpent Squad's hideout. Once there, we see one of Frank Robbins' traits. That is multitasking. Why punch or kick when you can punch and kick at the same time? Also, get used to that crazy expression. Frank loves drawing it. And I get what he's trying to do here, but it does look like Viper's just got a very small arm. A short while ago, a fire started in the building's basement, ignited by one of the police officers' weapons. Now that fire begins to take hold. The Cobra panics. He doesn't want to die. Instead, he wants to get out of the building. But Viper, in an effort to keep them together, to maintain solidarity, shoots him. Nice one, sister. Nomad takes this opportunity to get the drop on Viper, but as he's mid-air, he's knocked off course by a fire hose, and not a moment too soon, because as he heads one way, the burning building collapses around Viper's ears. Steve grabs the Cobra and gets them both to safety, whilst the building, Viper, even the Serpent Crown are either lost to the flames or washed down the sewer. Of course, both Viper and the Serpent Crown return in the future. In fact, if you want to see the Viper's return, then follow the link on the screen now. I can't help but think that the Serpent Crown, Krang from Atlantis, the pair of them were just diversions from the main storyline here. Cap. Which, of course, now means Rosco. Ain't this the life, though? Come on, crooks, give me a tumble. The new Captain America will put the kibosh on yous. So annoying. The Falcon has found him, and not only does he not find him annoying, but he's going to give him a tryout. Something which, of course, Rosco is happy with. I just knew you couldn't be as big a banana as you was acting. Falcon says they will go out on patrol together tonight, and he will show Rosco the ropes himself. So I guess it's official. This is the new Captain America and Falcon. And it's not long before they find some action, as Rosco himself spots some baddies in some pretty snazzy outfits that he says are liking towards that bank. In fact, they're pointing their way to that wall with a laser. Boining? Or burning? Falcon agrees they need to take these guys down. Rosco whitters along all the way through the encounter, and really he should listen to Falcon's advice. I mean, look at this. It's gibberish. On occasions like this, it actually helps to read it out loud. See, they both thought they was big guys, so they deserved a big job. You know, a job worthy of them. That's hard work. Reading Rosco's dialogue may be hard work, but dealing with the bad guys certainly isn't, as he and the Falcon soon finish the job. But something strange is going on, because it seems that far from robbing the bank, they were bringing money in. Whilst our two heroes are distracted by that mystery, they are zapped half unconscious by a masked man. A man who is masked no more, because it is none other than Captain America's arch enemy, the Red Skull. And Rosco says, "Oh my lord." Shouldn't that be, "Oh my Lloyd"? I'm really not sure about the art, you know. Anyway, we have now seen the Nomad in action a couple of times, but don't get used to it, because this one is called Nomad No More. As you can tell by the cover, he isn't the only one we're going to say goodbye to in this issue. So this could be one almighty issue, although it does begin with some very bizarrely dressed villains. Nomad is multitasking quite nicely on these three. Two of them are henchmen, and their boss is called Gamecock. Of all the names, I guess someone thought that was a good idea. We get some more frantic expressions from Frank Robbins, as well as limbs flying in all directions. But the battle is brought to a premature conclusion after someone launches a rocket at them. Gamecock and his accomplices flee the scene, not wishing to be blown up. But as he leaves, he promises that he and Nomad shall meet again. They don't. I think Steve Englehart and everybody else realised that he had created one of the worst villains of all time. So, Nomad has battled Gamecock and company, been fired on by a bazooka, but now he has the most terrifying encounter of all. It's Angry Layla, Sam Wilson's girlfriend. And if ever a Frank Robbins crazy face suits anybody, it's her. She wants to know why Nomad and various other people have been looking for the Falcon. She has also been looking for him, because he has been missing for 3 days. News that of course is a shock to Nomad. She tells him that Falcon hasn't been seen since he went missing with the person that she calls the Kid Captain America. With that bombshell, Nomad sets off to find his old colleague, although Angry Layla thinks he's only now interested because of White Captain America. She's so angry. Nomad makes his way to Sam Wilson's office breaking his wrist in the process, it seems. There is of course no sign of Sam at his office, but Steve does find Gabe Jones and Peggy Carter, who are also looking for Sam on behalf of S.H.I.E.L.D. Of course, they don't know that Nomad is Steve Rogers, and when he says that he is looking for Sam, they tell him that his help isn't required. Nomad's search next takes him to Morgan. Surely that crime boss knows where Sam is. After dropping in and, of course, multitasking. I mean, how many people can you punch and kick at the same time? He gets to the boss and starts asking questions. Morgan doesn't know where the Falcon is. He wished he did. In fact, it was him that sent Gamecock out to find the Falcon. Oh, you shouldn't admit that. Outside Morgan's office, Steve notices a bit of a kerfuffle outside the local branch of the Federal Bank. It seems that everyone has lost their savings because someone recently broke into the bank and replaced all the real money with counterfeit. Meanwhile, Nomad's search continues. His next idea is to go and ask Power Man if he knows where Sam is. Why Power Man? Well, it seems it's because he's black. Not your finest moment, Steve. But Power Man isn't even in town anyway. After passing another crowd fueled by bank panic, Steve decides to call Professor X. After all, it wasn't so long ago that the Professor suggested that the Falcon may be a mutant. This was during the time that the X-Men's own adventures were on hiatus, owing to poor sales. However, the school is still operating, and it's the Beast who answers the phone. Oh, now he's been twisted out of shape. It seems he's the only person home at the moment, and he tells Steve that he hasn't seen hide nor hair of the Falcon. But he says that Steve shouldn't worry, because he knows that when mutants first discover their abilities, they sometimes need time alone. All will turn out well, because as the Beast himself has learnt, you have to be what you have to be. A message that seems to hit home. But the good news is that Steve has now found a solid lead. Or rather, the solid lead has found Steve. Because Red Wing is there, clearly trying to get Steve's attention. So Steve follows him across the skyline until they reach one particular rooftop, where Steve makes an horrific discovery. It's Rosco. He isn't just bruised. He isn't just broken. He is dead. This hits Steve hard. I'm really not convinced about this art. The Falcon is there too, tied up. And it's fascinating that although Steve is dressed as the Nomad, the Falcon instinctively, despite everything that's happened with Rosco, calls him Cap. The Falcon tells him that it was the Red Skull, that the Skull had found Falcon and the new Captain America and wanted to exact his revenge. But discovering it wasn't his Captain America, he went berserk, killed Rosco, beat the Falcon to a pulp. I know I found Rosco particularly annoying, but it does seem strange that he died off-panel. A bit of a wasted opportunity. If we had actually seen him being beaten to death, surely it would have been more powerful. Maybe he would have had an opportunity to redeem himself, to show qualities that I, for one, didn't know that he had. Falcon tells him that the Red Skull wanted to triumph over the best. He wanted the real Captain America. And we, and Steve, despite whatever costume he wears, know who that is. But he doesn't want to be Captain America. He doesn't want to stand for the ideals that those in power only pretended to stand for. America has changed, and so has he. But then he realises that it is he who has been at fault. He can't blame good people for putting their faith in the wrong leaders. His previously simple view of the world, his naivety, is his problem, not America's. He says the country didn't let him down, he let the country down. If he had paid more attention to the American reality rather than the American dream, then maybe he would have uncovered the Secret Empire's plot earlier. And then Steve makes the realisation that Steve Englehart has been trying to show us for these last few issues. With Steve quitting as Captain America, other people will inevitably try to take his place, try to fight for that dream. As a result, some people have been injured. One has lost his life. Steve can't allow this to go on anymore. And, dare I say it, Captain America is back. He makes his full return in the very next issue, and looking at the cover, what do you reckon? It's as though nothing had ever changed. So, what do you think? Time for the big showdown with the Red Skull? I'm afraid not.
I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, look at that cover. Clearly this is the final showdown between the two great foes. And indeed, they do clash in it. But it isn't the final showdown. That final showdown also doesn't come in the next issue, and it kind of doesn't come in the issue after that either. This was surely supposed to be the climax of Steve Rogers' resignation and then return as Captain America. But instead, the final boss battle meanders on over 3 issues. And even then, at the end of issue 186, the Red Skull isn't defeated. He escapes. Cap swears he will find him, but the two don't actually cross paths again until the pages of Captain Britain comic. And that story is most definitely not a continuation of this one. What happened to our climax? It was round about issue 185 that Steve Englehart was offered another gig at Marvel, and he thought it was probably the right time to move on. Then, although he plotted this issue, he co-scripted it with the man who was taking over from him, John Warner. John Warner only lasted a couple of issues before Tony Isabella took over, and then Marv Wolfman, and then Jack Kirby, believe it or not. Somewhere among that relay team of writers, the Red Skull's unresolved ending was just forgotten about. And that means it's quite difficult to pinpoint the end of the Return of Captain America storyline. Well, I don't want to leave threads dangling, so just so you know, it was the Red Skull that was behind the counterfeit money subplot, something to do with undermining the American economy. As for the Falcon, he recovers from his beating, and he and Cap are soon back in action together. Rosco is hardly mentioned again, and who is behind that rocket launcher attack on Cap? Who knows? The Red Skull, probably. It's never revealed, so your guess is just as good as mine. This whole saga can be split into two halves, which I did. The first half had a clear endpoint, a mid-season finale if you like, where, with the Secret Empire story wrapped up, Steve Rogers quit his role. The second half, however, it just stumbled on and on. We had Steve Rogers enjoying civilian life, then him as Nomad, and then his return as the Sentinel of Liberty. But that was down to the Red Skull killing Rosco, which propels the story onward again. Not that that had a tidy resolution either. Even when the Red Skull leaves the scene, we are left with the Falcon in a coma. When does it all end? Here's a question for you. Who was the villain in the first half of the saga? Easy, the Secret Empire, along with their lackey Moonstone. Straightforward, neat, tidy. So who was the main villain in the second half? The Red Skull? Well, he only appeared at the end. The Serpent Squad then? Well, they came and went, didn't they? Lucifer? Gamecock? You see my point. I just think the story was beginning to wobble and then tailed off completely from the moment that Steve took up the shield once more, rather than that being the triumphant climax. Even in my review, you may have thought that I skipped a suiting up montage, as Steve cast off his Nomad persona and pulled on Old Glory once more. But no. The issue literally transitions from Nomad saying he will fight the Red Skull as, and then he finishes off that sentence as Captain America in the very next panel. As I have said, this issue, where the Falcon was left in a coma, was Steve Englehart's last. New writer John Warner only stayed a couple of issues before moving on to a couple of not-so-popular titles, such as The Son of Satan, a backup strip in The Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, the Ulysses Bloodstone strip in The Rampaging Hulk. And Steve Englehart? His long career continued unabated. According to his blog, the Captain America title that he helped to resurrect entered another period of decline after he left it. But what about his time on the book? He stated that he set out to ask and answer the question, who is Captain America? I would suggest he did that. Captain America believed he represented the ideals of the United States of America, embodied in its government and admired by the population. When he discovered that the people who made up the government adhered to a very different set of ideals, and that the people of the country weren't quite as single-minded in their purpose as they had been in the past, his identity and own purpose disintegrated. But seeing others step into his shoes and fail, only to be replaced by another, and then another, showed him that America still needed that symbol, that aspirational figure. It took more than being an athlete. It took more than being a tough guy. And yes, it even took more than being a kid who works in a gym.
Did you hoit yourself?
Regardless of the government, regardless of the divisions in society, Captain America still played a vital role. And, like it or not, there is only one man who can truly fill it.